Hi, my name is Shaquille Shaniqua Joy, and I'm the host of Harman, Kardon, Inspired by Sound. Today, I'm here for a lovely conversation with systemic designer and experienced architect Christopher Daniel. Welcome, Chris.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Lovely.
Good.
Thank you for being here. You studied architecture, and I would really like to start by learning a little more about the reasons you decided to go into that direction.
I think there was a point in my teens when I first discovered the idea of designing. Not the idea of design, but the actual act of designing, of looking at something and figuring out an answer, figuring out a solution, solving a problem by making something, by changing something. I've spent a lot of the last 15 years designing performance places. And when I say, I've been a theatre consultant, a theatre architect, they go, oh, you've designed sets. I've never designed a set. What I've always done is I've had the opportunity to work on the design of the place where someone can come into it and think, here's how I'm going to do the set, here's how I'm going to direct the show, here's how we're going to tell this story. I'm a real believer in what Stuart Brand says about a building isn't something you finish, it's something you start. It's a place where you live your life. It's a place where you live the stories of your life. So, and whether that's your workplace and it's the stories of your work life or your home, my perspective on it is that it's other people's stories that are the important thing, and I'm facilitating those stories.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because even when you are talking now, like, you're very specific about your words that you choose. And I think when we spoke before, we both realized that we kind of share this love for language and being very specific and having reasons as to why we use certain words. And I think I read a quote somewhere before we spoke that said that you design for possibilities rather than expectations. And I was curious, like, in what way that reflects in your way of working and designing.
That's, when in your introduction, when you said systemic designer, it's that I'm more interested in designing the system rather than the object. I'm interested in creating the conditions that allows someone, often the people I'm working with are creative, whether they would call themselves that or not. I'm trying to maximize their creative possibilities. Buildings last a long time. We want to be creating them in a way that they can evolve alongside our lives. So it's not about my expectation of what other people will do there. It's about creating those possibilities for people to make stories. There's a saying, old famous saying about design, that 99% of good design is invisible. If something has been well designed, you just don't notice it. It's not the thing that stands out. It's the thing that just makes things work better. That's really interesting. I think also when it comes to designing an experience, like, how do you design an experience? You told me that you don't want to design objects. You want to focus on the experience. What does that mean? How does that look like? It's focusing on the design of the system, not the objects. The system ends up involving objects. Yeah. It's not that I do enjoy designing an object. Yeah. I mean, that's what got me into this as a teenager. That's what's like, I wanted to make these things and craft them and yeah, I enjoy it. But you can't actually design someone's experience. All experience is personal, that's our own. Our lived experience is our own. All we can really do is optimize the conditions for people to have a certain experience. So you focus a lot on the cultural sector and designing and creating places where people go to for, like, a good time, basically, right? Or to experience something. They go there with an intention. But I was wondering how your process maybe, or your way of working, changes also looking at sound, because that plays a big role when designing a smaller place compared to a bigger place. So the first part of your question, when you're talking about going to, so we were talking before, we've talked about going to the theatre, we've talked about going to gigs and things like that. And the experience of going to that place, it began when you bought your ticket. Yes. And it ends, well, it may never end if you remember it. A lot of my work has been the design of performance places, places where if you want to get a large number of people into the right position to have an amazing experience of seeing someone acting on stage. When I was just starting out, I had the opportunity to work on the redesign of the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford. And that was a lot about how, in the early 20th century, they'd got all these people sitting in front of the stage like it was a cinema screen. That was the new way of thinking, was this is modern, is the screen, let's look at that. Yes. But actually that means some of the people were really far back. And when the people who taught me my craft at the time that I was working on it, when they had the opportunity to redesign this theatre, it was the idea of let's bring everyone in, let's get everyone shoulder to shoulder, and so we're really there together. And actually it's that sense of, if I go to a concert, if I'm at a classical concert, I want to have the comfort and I want to be able to sit I want to really be able to sense it almost in my own little world.
Yeah.
I don't want to know the people are next to me.
True.
If I'm at a gig, I want to have that opportunity, get my hands in the air and, all that kind of thing and know they're either side of me. In the theatre, it's somewhere a little bit different.
Yeah.
A lot of this is to do with what it would be like to be in a small space, listening to that, to have that personal experience.
Yeah.
And quite often, talking about sound, it really comes down to materials and it comes down to shapes and that coordination of, again, it's the system. The whole place becomes a system. You can have a perfect looking place that you can take great photos of, but if the materials aren't right, it doesn't sound right when you go in there.
Yeah.
And that experience of going in through a corridor and suddenly the sound changes when you get into the room, that's vital. That's like, oh, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm in this little cozy little space, or, oh wow, forget the scale of this thing. That is, we don't see it.
Yeah.
But that what we hear is really vital as we go in.
I think it's beautiful what you said about that it might never end if you remember it. That's a beautiful way to look at it, because then you really think of it as an experience and something that you hold in your memory and that you kind of have forever afterwards. Talking about these bigger spaces, what are smaller spaces that maybe or places, I should say.
Right.
This is also something I wanted to talk about. We're going to get to this in a bit. But what are places that we maybe can look at that are smaller to compare it to, like the big venues that you just mentioned, just so that I can get an understanding of how these things differ? Because I remember you shared a story of how if someone sits all the way in the back of a theater, there's the wall behind them, right? And then the sound travels through the space, and it's actually really important to think about that very person that is all the way up that people might forget about, but because the sound bounces off that very wall.
Yeah, and it's to do with whether or not they're getting that clear sound coming straight to them without the sound behind them. And I'm not an acoustician.
No, I
just know enough about the acoustics to know when to ask them have I got this right? Is that okay, the way I've done that behind it? I'm thinking about small spaces. One of them's the bathroom. Someone who lies in a bath and you get the sound of water and what the water does and how that changes the sound. And the difference between a bathroom with a full bath in it and not, that you've got that sound absorbing the water. Another would be a car. The sound of a door closing, that sort of distinctive sound.
Wow, that's
and
true.
And you go from being, you're not that far from the physical space, but you're going into a massively different sound environment.
Yeah,
and suddenly you're in a place that's been fully designed. That's a different acoustic experience.
No, that's really true. And I also think, specifically with music, because it's something that kind of the sound mixes with the environment and then the music that you play or the silence that you may have. Do you also notice when you step into different places, whether it is a very small one like a car or a really big venue, that you're very technical and you're analyze it?
There's an acoustician that I worked with for many years who was from a choral background. And anytime she walked into a venue that we might be changing, she would just, and I'm not going to try and sing, but she would just sing a note. And there others would go in and they clap. And they go in there, they're just checking what that acoustic is like, what that reverberation time is like immediately. I'm really interested in the musician John Cage, minimalist 20th century composer. He wrote a piece, one of his most famous pieces, was just silence. But he used to say that this, and I'm not going to quote him entirely right, but it was to do with the fact that silence is never silent. Actually, the sound of silence it's an absence of something that you specifically put on to listen to.
Yeah.
But actually the silence, that's what we're talking about, the closure of the car door.
Yeah.
It's a different condition of silence to when you're outside.
Yes.
The whole thing is different.
That is very true. It's interesting. It kind of, for me, it reminds me of when you move your body a lot. And then sometimes with yoga, there's a last pose where you just lay, right?
Yes.
And you can feel you're not moving, but you can feel something. There's something going on.
Absolutely.
And then it also reminds me of the conversation that I had with Yuri Suzuki for Harman Kardon Inspired by Sound, where he shared that from a certain point in when looking at music history, even noise got classified as music. So it's really interesting and this is, I think, what you mentioned about closing the car door and being in that space and then the sound being different. it's funny because I immediately know what you mean, but I've never thought about it in that way.
It's an interesting thing, so I would defer to him on this, but the idea of noise even, there's a point at which the idea of noise became a thing.
Yeah.
And background noise, as opposed to just the sound of where I am.
Yeah.
And so it's that different thing of, actually, when I put music on, I am changing where I am.
Yeah.
And we're back to actually with the gig and with the experience of never forgetting it. Let's say you do sit in a car listening to music that you've just heard live, or you went to a gig 10 years ago and you put that on and you're connecting to your past experience. There is this continuity in the relationship between experience and memory. This is something we're designing the conditions for. This is the place we're trying to allow people's stories to be.
Yeah, beautiful. Oh, wow. And you also already mentioned, like you said, like you're not specialized in sound, obviously.
Right.
But I think that is also something interesting because as like a designer or an architect, working on a project that is so huge, that is like something that you do often because you work in a, like, or you decided to work in a field that focuses on focusing on the cultural sector. The conditions are very different than I imagine than designing someone's home, because it's not just a family or maybe another one that moves in afterwards. It's hundreds and thousands of people that pass through and have like all of these experiences, which I can imagine is also beautiful to know while working on something like that. But I wanted to know more about the process from brainstorming to maybe sketching and then really getting to the final end result, and what role collaboration plays in that when working with, for instance, the people that are responsible for the sound.
So you were saying how this would be different to a home. I tend to start from the position it's not that different to a home, because often with the
I thought you were going to say that.
Often with the cultural institution, they're not changed that often. The clients are professionals at the thing that they do, the protection, preservation, creation of culture. And when they realize they need to do what we would call a capital project, they need to change their space in a significant way. That's like deciding, we're going to change our home. That is, I've been here for years. This has been like this for longer than I've been here. True. There's a huge responsibility around doing it. And then you have the addition of the relationship that people have to those cultural institutions, what they expect from them. So what the audience expects, and whether you cause that massive disrupt.
Yeah, because if I go somewhere, I also have like a feeling and like a connection that I've already built with the place. Yeah. And then if something changes, I'm sorry for interrupting you. I'm looking at
don't
it.
Worry.
Like,
loving it.
I'm looking at it. I'm like, maybe it's better or maybe not, but I do have an opinion on it as a visitor, right? Because you built your own personal connection that you feel strong about.
And also the reputation of that place. So in 2011, some friends and I made a place called The Yard. It's a theatre in Hackney Wick in East London. That initially it was a pop-up and it never popped down. And I really love the fact that I got to contribute to the creation of this place, designed the auditorium, worked to help build it. A bunch of us built it with our own hands.
Wonderful.
And I get to live in the reflected glory of the fact that people have then made that place amazing. And what they've done is the people who've run that place, that organization, the people who've put on shows, who've made shows, the people who've, it's become a real great venue for club culture and raves and particular communities finding a home there. What that place is now, I don't have authorship over that. They all have some sense of authorship over that.
Yeah.
And it's to different levels, and you have to figure out how that place moves through time into the future. But there is a sense of belonging and ownership and shared meaning that come out of these places.
Yeah, and it's funny that you brought up like that project now, because my next question was about the Roundhouse, because I thought it would be nice to hear a little bit more about a specific example, because other's we're having all of these, you know what I mean?
Yeah, happily stay.
But now you already brought this up, but I would also love to know a little bit more about how the Roundhouse works.
Okay.
And what it was like working on that.
Yeah, so as with all the projects that I've worked on, and we're back to, you were asking about collaboration, and one of the things I would say is just, I've had the luck, the opportunity to work in collaboration with a whole load of people and a whole load of projects, and the Roundhouse is one of these. The Roundhouse has been going since the 1960s. The Roundhouse as a building, it was a train servicing depot in the 1800s, and then it was just used for storage for a while. Then it had famous gigs in the 60s, like all a bit kind of warehouse vibes of the day, like a little bit rough and ready. And then it went through a period in the beginning of this century where it was turned into a really beautifully designed cultural venue. And various people that I've known and worked with for years were involved in that before my time. And really, I just had an opportunity to be part of that next stage for it, where it's to do, often what I'm doing is to do with how you get people into the right place in the right way to be able to have the best experience they can. This was the opportunity to figure out how they could have a new seating system in order to allow themselves to change between gigs a lot quicker. It's incredibly unglamorous in certain ways. But what it's doing is it's facilitating the glamour.
What is unglamorous? Your part in it, or the fact that they have to change, like...
Well, I'd say my part in it is like, I could say I worked on this project.
Oh, yeah.
But really what it is, it's like, no, what's the really technical way that we can make these seats, at the push of a button, collapse up into a unit that we can get out of the way, so we can go from being a seated theatre for a few days to doing a big stand-up party or
change the experience.
And it's how can we do that? What are the systems we can put in place that can allow that kind of change, to allow more culture to be experienced and more people to have all these experiences? And I nerd out over the figuring out of the technical way to make these things happen. It's like, oh, you were involved in that really cool thing. I was like, yeah, and the bit I did was not cool, but that's what allowed this to be cool.
But I just wanted to say it is really cool because, because it's fascinating, because these are also the things, and that's what you mentioned earlier, is that really good, I think you said really good design, like, is
it's invisible. Yeah.
And if I go somewhere as a visitor, like, I don't really think about, well, I actually do because I work in the sector, but...
Right, exactly, well, exactly.
You know, but usually if you go somewhere, like, the goal is that people don't think about these little things and that they come to arrive and can be present and have a good time and enjoy themselves.
And the same, you come back to sound, because if somewhere sounds really good, you just go in and it's effortlessly sounding really good. You don't want to think about that. You want to think about the song.
True.
You want to think about that moment.
Yeah.
You don't want to be having to plug all things.
And I also think for an audience, I think almost everyone has been to a concert or a show where they felt like, something was off with the sound, like I would have enjoyed it, but the mic was too low, or I don't know, whatever it is. And then when talking about the way sound travels through a place, how does that look more specifically when thinking about materials, for example?
So the most broad thing would be, is it a hard material or a soft material? Is it something the sound is going to reflect off, or is it something that the sound is going to be absorbed into? So it's one of the things with an auditorium is that we have all the seats that if they're empty, you want them to be ideally absorbing as much sound, as much reverberation as if a person was sitting in them. So it's that thing that when we're sitting here and I'm, a human being covered in fabric, there's a certain amount of absorption to me being in a place. When we were talking before about, say if you're in the back row of an auditorium, the question is really about what the material behind you is, because that sound's coming towards you, but then if some of that sound goes past you and then bounces off, if it bounces off directly or if it bounces off, if the curve is wrong, so that the sound gets focused on you, that's going to mess up what you're hearing. So really it becomes about, can I disperse the sound using soft materials or surfaces which are bumpy or have got like shapes to them that the sound can be dissipated. Yeah,
and so that counts for any space, like a big space, but
exactly.
And now I'm like, place, space.
I noticed you're doing it as well. No, it's great. It's really interesting. That's definitely the case where, if you think about old cars and how much of the inside of them would have been metal, then you have fabric panels in them to try and make the sound not bounce around too much. With modern cars, you get the level to which where the soft parts are, where the hard parts are, exactly how soft they are. You think about when I sit in a seat, how comfortable is it?
Yeah.
But I bet you they're thinking about how does that seat sound when no one's in it.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah.
It's like the sound of one hand clapping.
Yeah.
What does a seat sound like when no one's sitting in it?
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. What we tapped into earlier already was that you prefer the term place over space. Why?
Well, I use them. I mean, we've talked about language, and I use them. I use them slightly differently. Yi-Fu Tuan, who is an American academic, writes about space and place. He wrote a book in the 70s called Space and Place, and he refers to it as being place is space plus meaning.
Got it.
So we're back to talking about experience to some degree, in that everywhere is a space. Space is kind of a finite resource, as in the space on this planet.
Yeah.
If we add another story onto a building, we haven't added any space. We've added a usable place onto the top of the building. So for me, it comes down to, you have a volume of space, and when you spend time in it, you're adding meaning. Or when you take care over crafting it, you're adding meaning. And everything has different meanings to everyone, and the level to which a place feels like a place to me is a reflection of how much meaning I can see someone else has imbued into it, and how much I may have with it. So the more gigs I go to at a particular venue, the more of a place that feels like to me, or the more craft someone has put into the creation of a particular space.
Yeah.
The more that I go in there and like, oh, look at this place I'm in. And that's my terminology. Other people are welcome to use it, but for me, it's quite an important distinction.
Yeah. And then how does that, we already spoke about collaboration, but it just also keeps coming up, right? Because that's a huge part of your work in the end. How does that kind of reflect in the way that because you mentioned designing for possibilities rather than expectations, how does that work with the different puzzle pieces of the different people that you collaborate with, and like their ideas of what the possibilities should be and yours? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you also mentioned you don't see yourself as the author of a building, but rather as like someone that contributes the way other people do as well.
Yeah. I view every client as a collaborator. It is someone they're looking for a particular thing, a particular way of changing their space, their place, their lives. And they are looking for someone, a professional who can help them with that, and also can assemble a team of other professionals who can help them with that.
I forgot to ask something earlier that now popped up in my head again. We spoke about sound, and you told that like sometimes people clap when they walk into a building, or your colleague who like would sing a specific note.
Yeah, amazing. And you really know that. That's one of many. She's really good at this. Wow, that's amazing.
But it made me think that there must also be a huge difference, even what you mentioned around the car, when closing the door and it's quiet, right? To then turning on the speakers and listening to music. There are differences, right, when designing for natural sound versus amplified sound.
Hugely.
How does that make your work, I wanted to say make your work easier or harder, but how does it change it, I should say?
I mean, the times that I've worked on places that are predominantly for natural sound, unamplified sound, I've worked on lots of theatres, and the idea is, can you get that crisp sound? Can you get the sense that you're at the back row and you can hear that person perfectly when they're talking really quietly on stage? That's a thing to design for, and that's a really clear target. The thing with a musical venue, which is going to do unamplified sound.
Amplified.
And if you're going to do unamplified. So the thing is, to do something for amplified sound, it's a bit like more straightforward, because you know that you have a space, and then you know that whatever you're going to be, if you've got the right speaker system and you've designed it correctly in with all the angles and the whole thing is set up right, you have a fairly controlled condition. And talking about cars, it's particularly because people don't tend to modify the inside of their cars except with the stuff they pile up in it or whatever, or the people inside it. So it's a fairly controlled place, so you can design it to optimize it for beautiful sound. It's a really controlled environment in that regard. It's quite a high performance environment, given that it's moving, and that movement makes noise, and so there's a lot going on there. But with unamplified sound, say in a concert hall, so in a music venue, for that, there's different reverberation times you want to achieve for different types of music, and that, whether the venue is particularly for a certain type of music or it wants to be used for different ones, you get into the whole thing of what they call variable acoustics, and this is really getting into the weeds of it. It's like you start having, you won't see it, but actually parts of the walls will open up and close, and you have bass bins that can take, if you've got a really loud orchestra in a small venue rehearsing, how can you absorb that? And you have the way that it changes. Same thing in a car, in the fact that you may have, if the whole thing is designed together It's the way that the bass, the way that the treble is incorporated into the car to also work. I mean, this is something that way beyond me technically, but is how they do it so that you can have different people in different corners sing at different. I mean, it's just like, okay, that's really impressive.
Yeah. Oh, and now like I'm also like thinking again about the collaboration aspect, because you mentioned that the wall like moves, which is like something you think about, but then also something the person from sound like thinks about, and it's kind of like a learning process, which I guess life is in it. If you look at it,
all of it,
that's what it is. But you also teach, and that's what I was thinking about. What is something that is important for you that your students take away from learning from you, or being in conversation with you, I should say?
Nice.
And what is something that you take away on a regular or recently, or?
I mean, what I regularly get out of teaching, which the teaching I do, I'm not normally standing up at the front. I do occasionally get up and lecture and give a talk, and I do that in other areas. But actually the teaching, it's very much, we put a problem in front of them, invite them to come up with their solutions, and then we try to encourage and help them get the best possible solution within the parameters they've set up. And I think really it's about curiosity, and it's about figuring out your own creative agency, how to have an idea, get that idea out of your head and onto a page, into a model, test it in the real world. Because that's one thing, is that, ideas, we can have the greatest idea in our head, it's going to be like this, it's going to be amazing, it's all this kind of thing. You get it out, you start testing it, and you go, oh no, that bit, I didn't look at it from that side, I didn't show it to someone else, see what they think of it, see what impression they get of it. And it's that thing of get the idea out of your head and get it into reality, and then test it, see what you can make of it, and don't get too attached to your first idea. And this is the thing of, your first idea may be wrong, your fifth idea may be wrong, but if you keep on trying and making it, it's craft. And if you're crafting and practicing, that's what we were talking earlier about, the more we do something, the more we realize, we develop it as a craft. And really that's what we're trying to do. They get the opportunity to do that. And I get a real pleasure out of seeing it when they go, oh, all right, okay. And I get really smug about that. It's like, oh, great.
So we've been talking about sound a lot, but what we haven't touched upon is maybe the ways in which music or sound affects your process actively, like when you're sketching, or do you listen to specific music, or do you like it to be very quiet?
It's a really interesting thing, the way that our relationship to music has changed since it became so ubiquitous, since we've been able to listen to it wherever we go. We've got a little music player in our pocket, or our earphones in, our headphones on. Yeah. And it's the soundtrack to our lives. When you're listening to a certain music at a certain time and how it relates to that period in your life. For me, when I'm doing certain kinds of work, if there's a certain form of drawing, drafting, if I'm really getting into the detail of a 2D or 3D drawing, but also if I'm writing, I generally head to something with no vocals. My music taste is pretty broad, pretty wide, and I can be listening to whatever I like, and I'll put it on and I'll be bouncing along to it. And if I'm sketching, and if I'm using design software to sort of touch things up or to make images, but if I'm actually getting into the detail, the technical detail of designing, or if I'm writing, it tends to be classical or movie soundtracks, or more often than not now, deep house and techno. So there's a certain, not the harder techno that I might like if I go out to a club with good amplified sound, but quite a lot of deep house and electronic music, and a wide range of electronic music.
It's interesting that you said that we're so surrounded by music constantly now, because I grew up with a lot of music, and music always played a big role for me. And so now that it's available wherever I go, whenever I want to, also on my headphones, and having them wireless, so I can just run around and do whatever I want to do.
We're spoiled.
It is, but I also realized, my mom sometimes says to me, you're always tuning out the world, because I love to be in my own world. She's like, sometimes you need to listen to your surroundings and just take in the place where you are, also without music. And I've also, through hosting this series, I've thought about sound a lot this year. But it also taught me to sometimes actually listen to the absence of sound. And now that you mention it, actually being a sound as well, that's like a beautiful full circle moment.
We're back to the sound of silence.
Yeah.
We're back to, I mean, that's one thing I actually do is that when I get up in the morning and I'm on my first route to the first place, I might get up in the morning and I might put music on when I'm getting up, or I might put the radio on. But actually when I'm going somewhere, I will often, for the first 10 minutes at least, have nothing on, have my headphones off, just allow myself to be in that journey, to just to get myself started.
Yeah.
And then I try to be really conscious about when it is that I turn music on or when it is that I put a podcast on.
Yeah.
And I don't always manage, but it is that thing of being more conscious of it.
Intentional.
Yeah, there we are, that's the word, be more intentional.
Yeah. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a delight.
And it's like, so I think I'm going to walk into concert venues now and theaters and even cars.
Yeah, are you going to clunk the door in the car and you're going to go,
Exactly. Thank you so much.
It's been fantastic, thank you.